to the rundown. Now, as we reported at the top of the program, on Sunday, Israel will be ending its ban on foreigners entering the country, largely because the coronavirus situation here is not significantly better than most red countries. But one also has to wonder if the government finally responded to the growing outcry among diaspora Jews who found themselves locked out of the Jewish state. Now, that pressure included a letter organized by the RZA-Mizrachi movement and signed by over 300 rabbis and Jewish leaders pleading for their community members to be allowed entry to Israel under the hashtag #LetMyPeopleIn. Now they're getting in. But how damaging was this episode to relations between Israel and the diaspora? And should the latter's leaders have a say if a similar decision has to be made yet again? Well, joining us for more on that is Rabbi Doron Perez, executive chairman of the RZA-Mizrachi, joining us from Jerusalem, and Rabbi Rockoff, executive vice president, Religious Zionists of America, Mizrachi, speaking to us from New York. Congratulations, gentlemen. I don't know if it was your letter, but the timing was good. But I want to start with you, Rabbi Rockoff. We've heard some very strong reactions from community leaders, other rabbis, about the damage that this whole episode did to the connections between Israel and diaspora Jewry. Could talk about that, the disappointment many felt about not being able to come into Israel.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm hoping to be with you in person and with my friend and colleague, Rabbi Doron Perez, next week. Yes, I'll speak to that directly. Our community, the Religious Zionists of America community, all diaspora Religious Zionists who are part of the RZA-Mizrachi movement and beyond, Israel is a birthright of the Jewish people. It's not just a country. We believe that wholeheartedly, and we want to be with our family. We want to be connected in the way that that we feel is, again, part of our birthright. So for us, the fallout as leaders representing our community, there was an outcry from the ground. We responded, and as you have stated, we had 350 leaders from all across the diaspora pleading for this to happen, and we're very grateful to the government for accommodating. Of course, we'll comply with all COVID rules and regulations, but yes, no, there's definitely going to be some fallout that will have to be dealt with.
Well, let me ask you, though, Rabbi Perez, because, of course, Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, the child of two diaspora Jews who emigrated from the U.S., himself, by the way, a member of your own religious community, said, we just had no choice. I had to take into health concerns. You're speaking from Israel. How do you respond as an Israeli to that?
Firstly, Prime Minister Naftali Bennett has a deep concern for diaspora Jewry. There's no question about that, and he's proven that time and time again. But when you're sitting in the Prime Minister's seat, and your responsibility, first and foremost, is to voters and to the citizens of Israel, it's tough always to get the balance right between all the different decisions. And we feel that two things. Firstly, the World Mizrachi movement represents hundreds of thousands of Jews around the world, and they were really feeling the pain. And we felt it our responsibility to bring this before the decision makers, that their cries and their sense of distance and damage should be put squarely on the table of the decision makers. But I think the important thing is this. First and foremost, Israel has responsibility, obviously, to all of its citizens. There's no question about that. But at the same time, on an ongoing basis, to allow things in Israel to operate as usual. There've been no lockdowns. There've been months and months with no restrictions other than masks, no restrictions, yet the borders have remained absolutely shut. So it's been very good for the citizens of Israel, but it's been quite damaging for those around the world. And we think that the decision heavily favored the citizens of Israel and didn't give any leeway with those around the world. And I think there's an additional thing, and that is a factor that's been almost 2 years since the pandemic. And there are so many Jews, I can't tell you, Calev, who say, if there was a war in Israel, we would get on a plane and fight. In our lives, we have never been so long out of Israel. And if in Israel's time of trouble, we would be there. And yes, 5 months, 6 months, a year, but when it's 2 years down the line and people have not been able to enter the country for the longest period in their lives, we feel that our vantage point is putting their cries specifically without any other agendas on the plate of the decision makers. And we all know how politics and public policy works.
Right.
There are lots of considerations, and we need to put it in front of them.
But I want to, on the point about the decision makers, Rabbi Rockoff, there are some of your colleagues who say the Israeli government simply doesn't have the right to keep diaspora Jews, for example, from visiting the Western Wall Shrine, the Kotel, that diaspora Jewish leaders should be part of that decision-making, should even have a say, even a veto power. But there are others say, listen, Israel is a sovereign country. It has to make its decisions. What's your response to these arguments?
So, of course, I agree that, as Rav Perez was also articulating, there's a distinction between protecting citizens of the country, and that has to remain and should remain separate. The issue of diaspora Jewry's relationship to Israel as religious Zionists is very clear to us. Israel is the homeland of the Jewish people, and when it comes to making decisions in policy that in economics and in taxes and things that relate to citizens, so it's our obligation to get on a plane like many of my friends and colleagues, have done this year. I think this year's Aliyah was the highest in almost 50 years from North America, and it should continue. But the question of eligibility to come and visit friends and family during this period of time, as Rav Perez was just articulating, we view very much as within our domain to be able to request. So I would make that distinction very clearly.
Okay, to request. But I want to, Rabbi Perez, there was a Knesset member, Simcha Rothman, who actually proposed putting into law that Israel would have to make a distinction between banning entry from Jews from non-Jews because of the arguments we said. But there are others, including in your own community, say, well, the evangelical supporters of Israel might take offense at this. I mean, what's your feeling on this point?
That's an excellent question. It's a very complex issue. I don't think there's any monolithic answer to it. I definitely do believe, first and foremost, an elected prime minister of the country of Israel has a responsibility, first and foremost, to the citizens of Israel, Jew and non-Jew alike. Number one, they're the ones who vote for him or her, and those are the ones who put him in power, number one. Number two, we all know that the Israel's Declaration of Independence clearly says that it's a Jewish and democratic state. It is the nation state of the Jewish people. It's the homeland, the historic homeland of the Jewish people. It's unlike any other state. And just like there's the law of return. And therefore, Israel has a situation, unlike any other state in the world, that even if you've never been here and even if you go back generations, there is a historic spiritual connection to this place, unlike any other place in the world. And that needs to have some type of expression. It's also true that that the state of Israel and the land of Israel is holy to many, and there are many lovers of Israel and many people who want to come and visit. And we also need to find lovers of Zion an opportunity to give them some type of access. So I think it's not monolithic. There are different levels, but I definitely do think we need to work. I think what this has highlighted is the need to create more and more roundtable decisions to work out how there can be some type of dialogue in the decision-making going forward.
All right. Well, gentlemen, let's hope this discussion was largely academic. But of course, given the way this coronavirus has worked, we'd be foolish to think that these very same issues won't have to be dealt with yet again. Rabbi Doron Perez, Rabbi Ari Rockoff of Mizrachi, thank you for joining us on I-24 News. Well, let's move now to